July 10th, and only 2 more days of Stampede left, like, well, today, tomorrow, and Sunday. I'm posting, you know, I'm on social media, and I don't use my real name, but I also my social media is public. I don't have anything private. I don't screen anybody because, like, maybe it's I love a good conflict. But recently, and again, I've lived my like I don't know. I don't need to be explaining myself over and over again, but sometimes with social media, I get people just educating me on like my treaty rights, and that I'm being brainwashed, or that I'm no better than the white man coming from a white person. Okay, it's ridiculous sometimes when I have to answer on social media to, a young person, the example was, on TikTok, they're talking about a little piece of land near Sutuna, by the Glenmore Reservoir, has been designated by people in the city who are nudists, that this is a nude beach, and it's a river. It's part of a river, part of the river that they call this beach, and apparently people have been going there and swimming there nude. Now, to me, there's so many beautiful places on Sutina, and the desperate need to find a place where you can walk around naked, especially it's like a water hole. Like, it's like, if you look into Africa and you see all the animals coming to the water hole, just sort of dip in the mud and lie out on the beach. Like, because it's not a really, like when they say a nude beach, they're like, if that's what they figure is nice, like, pity the poor soul. They don't know what it's like to actually uh, see, a healthy stream of water, and there's so many beautiful spots in Kananaskis and other places where you can go and strip naked and jump into the cold mountain water. But no, they gotta say that this is a nude beach. They've designated it that, and yet it's on Crown land. They don't realize, too, that a part of the Glenmore Reservoir is and was on Sutina, and a lot of this controversy about what is there in the trespassing laws are based on, like, the military lease and all this stuff that we've had to deal with because the Indian agent and other people didn't recognize our voice, and that's a legal issue right there. But here's this young man saying these things about, like how dare I say that, people shouldn't be coming there to go strip naked and sunbathe. And I said to him, it's dangerous. So do you know where it's located? I said, do you know, like, people have come there and murdered people, burnt their bodies on that little stretch of river there? We live right by the city, and people just think they can do whatever they want. So I take license plates of any car that parks on the side, and efforts have been made to put huge boulders so people don't park there. And if they do park there for whatever risque, personal, sexual encounter, I take their license plates and I report it to the Sutuna police. And that is the right of every Sutuna citizen. But I don't see Calgarians or non-Indigenous people doing that or even understanding, because it was like a whole hour of conflict resolution on Instagram, to this stranger who had a private account too. And I just thought, well, like, you've got a private account and you're saying all this stuff, and yet you're hiding behind this private account. At least for me, I'm saying no. If you want to debate this, and you're fighting for these people to come onto Crown land, and you think that you have access to it, then approach our chief and council and make treaty then. I said, because you're talking about Crown land. This isn't provincial land. This isn't municipal land. This is Crown land. and it's a federal responsibility. So, excuse me if you're talking about municipal and provincial laws, those do not apply. But yet he doesn't see it. He just thinks, oh, you're so brainwashed by the federal government for your own people. Like, excuse me. I mean, throughout my life, I've had people like that. I mean, I always use the premier of Alberta, Danielle, and her her pretendian um, cohort or ally to Indigenous people. I've met women like her throughout my life, and men too, who just pretend, and then what happens? They stab you in the back after you friends with them, or they don't even have your back when it comes to conflict resolution. They'll throw you under the bus. So, like, I'm used to in social media when people make comments, I'm used to be thrown under the bus. I just called him a friend and thanked him, and hey, he wants to call me a nuisance to humanity. Hey, I'll take that title too if you want me to, because it doesn't change the fact that you're trespassing, and you're promoting people to come onto Crown land, and also you're promoting that this is a safe place when it really isn't. So, what can I do to warn them? I have no say over, people who are having criminal activity to even engage or come into my community. So, anyway, a lot of things that I'm doing here with this podcast that I do, like everything with social media and even using my voice, it's something new, and yet at the same time, I think it's essential. I think sometimes people need to get a grip on reality and the fact that Indigenous people aren't going anywhere, no matter how many billions of people are on planet Earth. There's a reason why we're all here. So anyway, that's my little spiel for the day when it comes to social media and having people criticize my opinion of why I will continue taking the license plates numbers of people who drive through my community who have no right to be driving through my community. And this also goes for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. If you're not from Tsuut'ina, you're still trespassing. And a lot of people who are Indigenous think, oh, well, I can drive on Tsuut'ina, or I could drive on any First Nations, Inuit, or Métis community. No, that's not so. Under the Indian Act, again, a racist act, but yet that's the law because it's federal, you can be charged with trespassing. Now, mind you, this Instagram person, he's non-Indigenous, because then he would have mentioned, well, I'm Indigenous, I could go on the land. I would have said, no, you can't. You can also be charged with trespassing. Now, did you know that? That's what I mean. As an elder, a knowledge keeper, whatever I say to people, like I'm telling you the truth. Take it or leave it. Most of the time, people don't want to understand it because all they know is what they feel comfortable with. And that's sad. That's a sad state for a young person to just, well, I guess attack me about like I said, what would you do if somebody went in your backyard and wanted to just hang out in your backyard all naked? Because he made the analogy of sort of like born wild and free. Like and then he says, well, I have no intentions of visiting that beach. After all that, so what was the purpose of the conflict? Again, hey, he got a few good words in there, but it's still the reality of, like, I'm trying to educate people. You cannot come onto Tsuut'ina land. I will take your license plate number and I will report you. Not just me, I'm just one person. But imagine how many people watch in my community who watch people come through our communities and take their license plate numbers. So, it's part of just living right next to a city of 1 million people, especially immigrants who, have the wherewithal to sort of second guess how we live. But again, like I said, I think it was last year they put out what they call a sting operation, where they and this was all legal, like people playing actors in certain roles, playing that they were a 15-year-old Indigenous girl on social media, and I don't know what platform she was on, but she had, like, just on that 24 hours, they had 5,000 hits of men wanting to buy sex from this child. And they charged 10 men. Now, these 10 men, it's published in Calgary. These 10 men are all immigrants. So what does that say about when immigrants come into Canada and the lack of education they have in what it is to be Indigenous, as opposed to them being immigrants coming in from a war-torn country or a country in conflict, or for what reason do they feel safe here when they themselves are living and wearing their skin? So that's why I say the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the framework for reconciliation is the very foundation of fighting systemic racism. It's there. It was created, so it's there to help all people. But if you don't really get the gist of it, then you're really not understanding what Canada is all about and what First Nations people are all about, or what we're even trying to help in bridging the gap, the cultural gap. I really admire people who are from different countries, or just different countries, different culture, that they can speak their own language. Can you, like, for me, when I hear people speaking their own language, especially if you're in a relationship and your partner speaks the same language, like, I'm just so totally impressed. Like, I'm just so grateful that part of them, that part of their homeland or part of their culture, is constantly being reinforced every day because of the relationship with the two people have. The reality of it is, like, in First Nations, we don't have that. At least in most who don't speak an Indigenous language, and that's part of fighting against systemic racism, even in municipalities in different parts of the city of Calgary, where immigrants come in and they want to retain their language. They want to find balance with their mental health. Same struggle as Indigenous people. Like I said, if they use the same framework as Truth and Reconciliation and create safe communities, again, it all has to start from within before it can start from without. So that's the what they call the paradox, or the in English, when I was in high school, they said, yeah, when throughout your life you will, the irony of it. Yeah, I think it was the irony. You'll find irony and paradox throughout your life. Yeah, I understand that now. But for me, I struggled at university. I struggled in high school, elementary school, all that I did. And I'm just grateful that a lot of the resources to help our young people with, like, who are autistic or have other learning disabilities, that people are more open-minded about it. But again, too, when you're older and you have these disabilities, how well do we articulate it to even get people to understand, like, this is who I am and this is the reason why I am the way I am, without having excuses of, like, oh, you're nothing but a lazy, good-for-nothing Indigenous person, stuff like that. It's the reality of the systemic racism and fighting people who just don't really care. They really don't, or they just think like something's the matter with the culture. And yet you understand, like, this one lady, her name is Winona LaDuke, brilliant Indigenous woman, fighting for the environment her whole life. I think she went to Harvard, and just the amazing work she's done. Like there's so many Indigenous people throughout my whole life that have been educating people about Indigenous people, and even the word colonized means like the breaking it down. It means to consume. So when you're colonized, you're consuming the person's language, you're consuming the person's identity. You know, when I talk about energy and I talk about protecting your energy, and how when a group of people come together without even knowing it, they're eating people's energy, like John Trudell, Lakota spiritual person who passed away. He said, "We're living in a time you got to protect your spirit because there are the forces out there are eating our spirit." And because of that, a lot of they're eating our identity, taking it, exploiting it, bastardizing it, and you know, making it look like we're beggars with our hands out, like especially with all this oil money. And you know, those oil companies just say, throw the money to those savages, treat them like hungry dogs fighting over, you know, a juicy bone. And of course, you know, every time they do that, because again, they're, you know, the people in these communities don't have economic development or any resources. Like they take advantage. They take advantage, and yet they think that because they get their way, that they're superhuman or that they're super intelligent. And yet intelligence isn't graded on that anymore. But you know, try to explain that to people who only have that in mind. They don't even know they're stealing. And I mean even physical in terms of capitalism. But but the reality of it is, like, that's how subtle it is. That when we're so complacent and we don't realize that we're participating in something diabolical. I mean, you know, of course, for me, I'd always question, but yet, even if I participate, I still don't fully commit. So maybe that's why I've never been in a relationship. I've just totally, fully haven't committed. But again, too, hey, you know, I've read articles where men have raised their daughters as boys, just so that they could, you know, they could get educated, because society dictates that girls cannot get an education. So certain things out of the norm that people do to, you know, fight against the system. And for whatever reason, I've advocated, or I've become who I am, isn't just out of the spur of the moment. It isn't because there's social media out there and people are listening. Oh, by the way, hello Darcy and hello Marie, and and hopefully I'll meet more people who will publicly come up to me and say, "Oh, I see you." But again, too, I've noticed that, like in the past 2 years, people come up to me and they recognize me. It's not like I try, like I'm not public. I'm not a private person, as in terms of like hiding or not letting people know who I am. It's like saying, "How old are you?" My whole life, I've never lied about my age, and it's the same. It's the same thing. Like when I make a statement, I'm not hiding to protect my identity. It's part of the backbone of the issue, or the reality of what needs to be understood. So a lot of times, even to get your head around it, you have to really have some sort of scientific expertise in the sense of critical thinking. So, like, even for example, like, how long does it take to cultivate a tomato from its original plant? Thousands of years. That's for any plant, any biology. And so all the structures, all the structures that made Indigenous people who they are today, without white supremacists even acknowledging it. And I think the shocking thing about it too is, like, when people say, "Oh, well, they were fighting amongst each other and they were eating each other," and yet, when the first settlers came on boats the first year, they all starved, and there's evidence of cannibalism. Like, so I think when people suppress their own culture within the realms of European settler states, just the reality of like divide and conquer still continues that legacy of of like capturing something and taking away from somebody, or gathering people up and shooting them, like mass murder. And that in itself, I'm very naive in the sense that I've lived this long in my lifetime in the Americas and have never lived that. Except, like, I mean, probably people who were soldiers who went to Vietnam lived that, or they were in the military. But I've been so totally immune to that. And if it's offensive to people who've actually lived it, I don't mean to be offensive. It's just the fact that that's my reality. It might seem like I'm living in Never Never Land or one of those Disney fantasy or fantasy island places, but I mean, that's how isolated I think for me I am. I haven't seen, I've like I mean, I understand starvation. I understand death. I see death sometimes in a month. It's a death every month. So it's a little harder, I think, for non-Indigenous people to understand because they're so fragmented away from the original people that they grew up with. And a lot of I'll say white women, when they come up to me and they feel comfortable in talking to me, I'll say to them, "Well, where did you grow up? Do you know the people that you grew up with, that you were a child with, that you went to school with, that you went to church with, or community events? Is your community still intact? Do you still live in your community? Are you going to be living in your community with the people you've known since childhood to middle age to old age?" And the audacity is for them to say yes, when I know it's a bloody lie. I'm going, where do you live? What's your community? Instead of saying a community, they say their religion. And that's the key. That's the red flag. The reality of it is there's uh, the point of so many things in our lives isn't written in stone, and it's more of swaying with the breeze or the wind. I think a lot of times we live in this fallacy that we can hold on to something and it doesn't affect us. But everything has an effect on everyone. My podcast is to help people think about how you see yourself as an Indigenous person, because you need to embrace yourself. You need to also release whatever shame or guilt you've had about your own identity. And we have a lot of healing to do, especially when when our relatives were raised to be ashamed of being Indigenous, were living in poverty, where their hands were put out and money was put in those hands, and they took it because they had to feed their children, or they took it because they wanted to look like they were important. And today, a lot of people put their hands out and get this money. Like, we'll use an example like Trump. The way he's been behaving, walking zigzag. That's just part of it, okay? But this man, like all the stuff, wearing Pampers, defecating on himself. What did he say? He talked about the Islamic Republic of Japan. What else did he say? Oh, he was talking with President Lewinsky, and he said to the audience, ask a question to President Putin. Like, okay, understand this. This is a president of a so-called country that holds the button to nuclear power. I shouldn't laugh, but people get annoyed at me because sometimes when things are scary, I laugh. But the reality is, like, why do the Republicans, allow him, or don't stop him, or don't confront him? And the reason I'm mentioning this story is because he chose all the people around him who are supporting him to behave this way. So no one's going to question. No one's going to question him. No one's going to confront him. And that's the kind of man he's been his whole life. And I use that analogy when it comes to colonial ways of thinking for Indigenous leaders. They're the same. They collect the people, yes, people. When a leadership is in question, like in my community, a leadership in question who has a propensity for boys, and people, and just the way he thinks about Indigenous women, and people just allowed that to happen. Even when people questioned him or confronted him, the people who supported him said nothing. And he got away with so much. The same as Trump. Now, whatever is happening in the United States, that's a different narrative for people in the United States. And that's what, 350 million people? That's nothing compared to our little community of 2,000. But it's a microcosm of what people will give somebody permission to behave a certain way, and that person doesn't give a damn, and he'll do that. He'll behave the way he wants to behave at the expense of his own ego, a person's ego. So the reality is, like, I don't know, it sickens me. I'm not white. Okay, so when I'm talking about Trump, I'm talking about Trump from the perspective of white people, because that's who he is. I can't talk about him because I'm not white and I'm not American, and I've never come from Europe, so I'm the settler state and all that, generations of that. I don't know that. So when I say the narrative about Trump, I'm talking from the opinion of white women and educated white women who, like, I'm sitting there having coffee with them, and they were talking about these conferences that the Republicans have, and the cities, like when the social media dating network, it's not a dating site, it's more of a hookup site where it just crashes. Could you imagine? This is what really blows my mind, that there are white men so horny to have sex with other men. They're so Christian-like, trying to cover up that they have this bisexual propensity. At the same time, they're controlling the way their wives think about, like, you need me to get into heaven. You need me to get your almighty dollar. And the woman who is going, yes, yes, sir, I'm submitting to my patriarchy. And this is what white women are telling me, okay? And I'm going, what? I said, you mean to say that this is the reality of what social media and what people have uncovered? And she said, yes, nobody's questioning these Republicans. They're just they're just listening to them and saying this and this about minorities, like, especially, like, what the hell, Mexico. What percentage of the population are indigenous? And yet Americans and white people think like that they have a right because their bloodline comes from Europe, when the majority of Mexican bloodline comes from this land here. And the reality of it is that it's taken 500 years for indigenous people in the Americas to say to people, look, enough is enough. You don't have the reign or the whip to whip us to obey you. And that's why people are so, like, up in arms about, you're not behaving the way we wanted you to behave. You're not behaving the way your grandparents or your parents behaved. What is the matter with you? Don't you know your own laws? That's why when I say, some people, they're mansplaining me about this park at Glenmore Reservoir, as if I'm so stupid that I don't understand what's happening. And yet, at the end he says, well, I'm not going to ever visit that place. Well, then why argue with me? Why even bring it up? For me, I post it on social media so people understand. Do not come onto our community in our reserve because you'll get ticketed for trespassing. That's all. But the reality too is like when you get so used to getting your own way that you think how you think and what you believe is is set in stone. And that's why when I look at white society from a white woman's perspective, and I realize like, oh my goodness, like it's one thing for white women to compete with each other in a very vicious, vile way just to get across um, or up the ladder. Now I've got to answer this phone, but I'm going to keep on going because I want you to hear what I do in private. Hello.
Hi, Marina. It's Tamara.
Hi. So I just wanted to touch base with you. I met with Violet,
hmm
and I mentioned that about the possibility of having a meeting like for the Treaty 7 people to meet about that industrial school site.
Yeah.
And she said that she had received email, but I think it was about the signage rather than any kind of meeting.
No, it's been both. Yeah,
Okay.
both things have been in the email, but she just hasn't ever replied.
Okay. Well, she said she's going to look through the email again.
Sounds good.
So I just wanted to, give you the heads up that I'm working on this end.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's been a curious thing on our part as to, what we need to change because just that she hasn't